40 years. That's how long the world went on without knowing what happened to Dedrick Smith. His name drifted through old police files, his photograph fading in family albums while the people who loved him held on to a hope that never had anything solid to stand on. But the story begins long before the discovery. It begins on a quiet evening when Dedrick left home behind the wheel of his car, promising he would be back before long. He never returned, and from that night forward, his disappearance carved a wound into his community, one that time never fully closed. For decades, the theories grew like vines around his name. Some believed Dedrick walked away from his life. Others argued he had run into trouble no one saw coming. But the truth had always been sitting somewhere dark and quiet, untouched by sunlight, buried beneath water so murky, even trained divers couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The breakthrough came not from rumors or new witnesses, but from technology that didn't exist when Dedrick vanished. A sonar pass over a forgotten stretch of water revealed something no one expected to find: a perfectly preserved outline of a decades-old vehicle resting at the bottom. Its shape was unmistakable, its age undeniable. And as divers descended, their lights cut through 40 years of silence to reveal a car that had waited too long to be seen. Before investigators confirmed anything, the community already felt the weight shift. A story that had never made sense was finally starting to speak. And as the recovery team brought the vehicle closer to the surface, everyone watching knew. This was it. The moment the past was about to rise into the present. The moment the mystery of Dedrick Smith would finally begin to unravel. To understand how Dedrick Smith became a mystery that lasted 40 years, you have to go back to the life he was living before everything went silent. Dedrick wasn't the kind of man anyone expected to simply disappear. He had routines, responsibilities, and relationships he cared about. Friends described him as dependable, steady, and always willing to help when someone needed a hand. Family members remembered him as soft-spoken but thoughtful, the type of person whose presence brought a sense of calm into any room. The day he vanished began like any other. Dedrick left home in his vehicle, telling those around him he'd be back shortly. He had no history of sudden decisions, no signs of distress, no arguments or conflicts that suggested he might be planning to leave. Investigators later confirmed he made no unusual phone calls, withdrew no large amounts of money, and left behind everything a person would normally take if they planned an extended absence. His disappearance didn't look voluntary. It looked abrupt. As hours turned into days, the search expanded. Officers canvassed the areas he was known to frequent. Family members posted flyers, knocked on doors, and begged for information from anyone who might have seen him. Witnesses reported scattered sightings, but none were reliable enough to build a timeline. Back then, the tools available for missing person investigations were limited. No cell phone data, no digital trails, no high-resolution sonar to scan underwater. The search depended on land, air, and human memory, and none of them brought answers. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The official case gradually cooled, not because anyone stopped caring, but because there was nothing left to pursue. No new leads emerged, no evidence surfaced. Dedrick's vehicle, the one piece of the puzzle investigators desperately needed, remained unaccounted for. Without the car, the case had no direction and no anchor. It was like Dedrick had simply evaporated. As time moved on, the disappearance became a quiet ache within the family. One of those unresolved chapters that presses on every holiday, every birthday, every moment of stillness. People who knew Dedrick aged, and some passed away without ever learning what became of him. His name faded from headlines, and only lived on in the private conversations of those who refused to let him go. But the truth was never gone. It was submerged, out of reach, waiting for a generation with tools capable of finally seeing it. And when technology caught up to the past, the long-buried story of what happened to Dedrick Smith finally began to rise from the depths. When investigators finally revisited Dedrick's case decades later, they did so with an entirely new advantage: modern sonar technology capable of revealing what human eyes and 1980s search methods never could. A cold case review flagged Dedrick's disappearance as one of several unsolved incidents where the missing person and their vehicle had vanished at the same time. Cases like that often pointed toward water. Lakes, rivers, and reservoirs near his last known route were suddenly back on the table, this time with equipment sensitive enough to scan through layers of silt and debris. The search team began systematically mapping one body of water after another, eliminating possibilities with each pass of the sonar beam. Most scans were empty of anything unusual: smooth terrain, fallen trees, and occasional metal debris that had nothing to do with Dedrick. The process was slow, meticulous, and unforgiving. But the people involved knew that long-term cases often hinged on patience, not luck. Then came the moment that changed everything. While scanning a quiet, overlooked section of water near an old roadway, the sonar screen displayed a shape no one could overlook. It sat several feet below the surface, sunken deep in sediment, almost invisible to the naked eye. But to the trained technicians watching the monitor, its silhouette was unmistakable: a vehicle. Not a modern shape, not a recent model. Something older, something that fit the exact era. Dedrick disappeared. Divers prepared themselves carefully. The water was cold, dark, and thick with decades of mud. Visibility was so poor that divers had to navigate by touch more than sight. As they descended, their lights cut small cones through the blackness, but didn't travel far. And then, through the clouded water, the vehicle slowly emerged, buried but still intact, a silent artifact from another time. The divers confirmed what investigators feared and hoped for all at once. The vehicle matched the make and model Dedrick was last seen driving. It hadn't drifted. It hadn't been moved. It had likely gone into the water the same night he vanished and had remained untouched ever since. When the car was raised from the depths, the weight of 40 years came up with it. Mud dripped from the doors. Rust clung to the frame. Yet, despite the harsh conditions, the structure held together just enough to tell its story. Inside the vehicle, human remains were found, remains later confirmed to belong to Dedrick Smith. Standing at the shoreline, investigators, divers, and even longtime locals understood the gravity of what they had uncovered. A 4-decade mystery had finally moved from speculation to truth. The search didn't end with celebration. It ended with quiet reflection. After so many years lost, Dedrick had finally been found. The recovery of Dedrick Smith's vehicle didn't just close a case. It reopened every emotion that had been frozen for 40 years. As investigators examined the car, they worked carefully, knowing every detail mattered. The angle of the impact, the position of the vehicle, and the condition of the interior all offered silent clues. The car appeared to have entered the water nose first, consistent with an accidental slide or misjudged turn in the dark. The shoreline in that area was steep, poorly lit, and lacked guardrails during the era Dedrick disappeared. One small mistake, a miscalculated turn, loose gravel, or even a moment of fatigue could have sent the car straight into the water without leaving visible evidence behind. Technicians ran tests on the recovered vehicle, even though years underwater had erased much of what they hoped to find. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of another vehicle pushing it, no indicators of a struggle. Everything suggested Dedrick had been alone. What remained was a vehicle that appeared to have simply left the roadway and vanished beneath the surface, hidden by darkness and a time period with limited search technology. When confirmation of Dedrick's remains came back, the news traveled quickly through the community. People who had lived with unanswered questions for nearly half a century finally had a chapter they could close. For some, it stirred memories of the original search, days spent combing wooded areas, checking abandoned buildings, and hoping for a clue that never came. Others quietly admitted they always suspected water, but had no way to prove it. And for family members who had held on to hope, the discovery brought a bittersweet truth. Dedrick hadn't walked away. He hadn't chosen to disappear. The place he'd been all those years was one that no amount of searching in the 1980s could have ever revealed. The site where the vehicle was found became a temporary gathering point. Some came to pay respects. Others came out of curiosity. But almost everyone walked away with the same realization. Without modern sonar, Dedrick's story might have remained a mystery forever. His case joined a growing list of long-term disappearances solved underwater, cases where families waited decades for technology to catch up. The investigators handling the case emphasized that the discovery offered something rare: clarity. While not every detail of Dedrick's final moments could be known, the overarching truth was finally visible. There were no signs of foul play, no hidden conspiracies, and no evidence suggesting he intended to vanish. What happened to him was sudden, tragic, and hidden by time. And as the sun set over the water where the car had rested for so long, the ripples gradually settled back into stillness. The place that kept Dedrick's secret for 4 decades was finally quiet again, this time with nothing left to hide. The day Dedrick Smith was finally laid to rest, the air felt different, heavier, but gentler. It was the kind of day where people spoke softly, not because they were afraid to make noise, but because the truth that had taken 40 years to rise deserved quiet. After decades of searching, of waiting, of imagining every possible ending, Dedrick's family finally had something they had lived without for most of their lives: an answer. His recovery brought closure, but it also brought perspective. It showed how easily a single moment, a wrong turn, a patch of darkness, a quiet roadway can erase a person from the world. And how, in those moments, entire families are left to carry the weight of uncertainty for generations. But Dedrick's story also revealed something far more powerful. Hope never truly expires. Even after 40 years submerged beneath mud and darkness, the truth still surfaced. Technology evolved. Search methods changed. People who had never met Dedrick decided his story mattered enough to investigate again. And because of that, a mystery that once felt unsolvable finally found its ending. The investigators who revisited the case called it a reminder that cold cases are never really cold. They are waiting for new eyes, new tools, and new determination. And Dedrick's story now stands as proof that even when time buries the truth deep underwater, it can still be found. As the community reflected on his recovery, many expressed a quiet gratitude. Not for the tragedy, but for the resolution. For the chance to finally speak about Dedrick Smith not as a question, but as a person whose story had been restored. His name no longer lingered in uncertainty. It now lived in remembrance. And for anyone who follows these long, heartbreaking journeys of the missing, Dedrick's story carries a message that is impossible to ignore. Every mystery has a place where the truth is hiding. And every family deserves the day that truth finally comes home. Thank you for watching this story. If you want more deep, real, and powerful true crime investigations that bring forgotten cases back into the light, make sure you subscribe. Your support helps us continue telling these stories. Stories that matter. Stories that deserve to be heard. And stories that must never be forgotten.